Welcome to CISO Interviews, where Affinia hosts cybersecurity executives sharing career advice, actionable insights, and tips so that you can enhance your career and succeed as well.
Michael, so awesome to see you again. Thank you for making time for us. Can't wait for more insights and another batch of wisdom for Affinia members and anyone who's listening. The topic of this conversation really is we first several sessions we discussed how to approach job search for someone who's passively looking, for someone who's actively looking. Now we are more at the end of this when we're actually going through interviews. And as candidates looking to interview for CISO positions or VP, maybe director positions, what are some of the best practices? What are some of the ways you would recommend? What are some of the steps people should take as they prepare for an interview? What should people do?
Yeah, but first of all, I want to reiterate these sessions are so much fun to interact with you. So thanks for having me again. Hopefully everyone's seeing some value. I've gotten a lot of comments, seeing them out there. So keep it coming and keep any good ideas coming. This is fun. This is super fun. So yeah, to your question, I guess the first thing I'd always remind people is know thy resume. So and LinkedIn. So anything you have out there, whether you provide it in a resume or it's on LinkedIn, it's fair game to ask. So just make sure you know your own content. And by the way, that includes posts. I had a situation last week where a CISO was kind of surprised because she basically had put a post out. There wasn't anything controversial, but it was just, they started asking about the post. Hey, what do you think about this? And how is this, how's it? And it was kind of nice because it means that clearly the company was trying to show that they were following her and followed her career. And that was great. But she was a little unprepared to comment on it. So yeah, just everything that you have in the public or private domain about yourself, it's fair game. So just, know thy resume. On that note, on the tails of that, I mean, just work on your storytelling, right? I have a rule with resumes when I go over a resume review with someone, it's kind of like, if you cannot associate a story with each bullet point on your resume, then that's going to be a problem because someone will be like, hey, how did this come down? Or what happened here? And then also having some artifacts to back it up. Is there a link? By the way, a link is a great, a link to the product that you help build and support, or, a link to the fact that you were just ISO certified or something, or a post-breach remediation link, something that you can show as an artifact. This is what we did. This is what our team and I did. And then any of those bullet points, like I said, in addition to a storytelling exercise, just be able to articulate how it aligns to the business. This is all about the prep when you're about to go into an interview, to ensure that you have your resume and your LinkedIn dialed in. I think that the next big thing is research the person, research the company. I am absolutely fanatical about researching every person I talk to, every company we talk to. So I'm a little bit excessive. People will say that about me, but I really like to be prepared. I use LinkedIn. A lot of people are like, do you use LinkedIn? I'm like, I love using LinkedIn to figure out where executives fit into the organization. You can learn a lot. It's kind of like a Sherlock Holmes, investigation. So, who would be the primary internal customers if you're a CISO going in for an interview? Try to map that out, right? What's the team look like today? So, you don't have to ask that question when you can find 11 to 15 people sitting in a team in a CISO role that you're about to interview for. See what their structure is. What are their titles? What's the nomenclature they use, right? All really fun stuff. And then the person you're interviewing for, where do they come from? Watch their career trajectory. What's their journey? I think that the goal here is that don't assume. I had a situation with a CISO the other day, a couple of weeks ago, actually, was like, well, I'm interviewing this person that's all financial services, 25 years of it. And he was like, he probably doesn't know anything about the fintech space. And I was like, hold on, instead of asking that, maybe ask him how the transition was from a Goldman to now a fintech company. I always think of the Ted Lasso scene where he's playing darts. It's like, be curious, not judgmental. That's a great scene if anyone hasn't seen it. but it's easy, especially as we get older. I get caught in this trap all the time. It's easier to get older to kind of think a certain way, but just keep your mind open and just try to understand where they came from. Know their products, right? Know everything about their products. What's their product offering? Who's their competitors? Really pour through their PR and understand how that product would initiate a security involvement. Is it doing it today? Look at the profiles on LinkedIn of the product people and see if they talk about security or securing their products. Really kind of cool stuff. There's bunches of, look at their customer success stories, right? Most companies have a customer success story. What are their requirements? You can go onto the legal page of just about any website and see what kind of requirements they have. You can guess it too, but you can see it right there. What are their compliance and regulatory pieces? And then also understanding their financials. Where are they in their journey? Public company, obviously a lot easier to see, but you can look at valuations pretty easy. You can find 409As. Just be careful not to get too fixated on that. A lot of people are like, well, their financials are this or that. I'm like, let's take a step back. I see the same thing with Glassdoor. People emphasize a little bit too much
about the Glassdoor because it's
CISOs. Don't look at Glassdoor and make your determination on that. That's my warning. Like I have so many people like, well, their Glassdoor was this or that. I'm like, yeah, they're still trying to rebuild. That's why they're hiring this incredibly important position.
But also it seems like, and I don't know what's your take on it. And probably it's company by company, maybe different.
Yeah.
But when I read a very positive, like over the top positive review, my first thought is it real? And when I read a super negative review, my first thought, well, maybe there was more to the story. Maybe it's just a disgruntled employee who felt wronged by the company, and this was their way of payback, where they're just exaggerating some of the facts. And then, so I'm kind of I'm torn between very positive, very negative. So maybe the truth somewhere in the middle, which kind of how valid or how useful that kind of review, where you doubt the positive and the negative for different reasons.
Very good point. And look, like we're a society that if the narrative is not handed to us, we're typically going to come up with our own narrative, right? We do that with individuals, we do that with companies, we do that with relationships, everything, right? And so this is one of those situations where you can catch yourself and be like, you know what? It's a data point. It's just a data point, right? For those of us who grew up in technology in the the mid 90s to late 90s, there was this website called Eft Company. You ever heard of that? I'm sure some of the people out there. That was just brutal because it was just like uninhibited, and obviously Glassdoor.
Poison, yeah.
Yeah, obviously Glassdoor is nowhere near that. It's a very professional. It's a great product, but it is a data point, right? So just a warning there. A lot of CISOs do. It's like one of the first things they say to me, like, "Well, the Glassdoor piece isn't this or that," and I'm like,
for sure, I want to double click on something that you mentioned. I think was really this being curious, not judgmental. I think it's very, it's an amazing soundbite and amazing point of view. From that perspective, as you do research, so you know who's going to be asking questions, who's going to be the interviewer. How deep do you suggest people go? Because I mean, online, there's not just LinkedIn. The professional side, there's Twitter, there's Facebook, there's by Instagram. How far down the rabbit hole do you go? Because I mean, you probably can surface political affiliations, hobbies, which some of it could be nice as an iceberg. Hey, I noticed on your profile you're into, sailing. So am I. Or hey, I noticed you spend you bounced around the world when you were in your 20s, backpacking through Southeast Asia. Like, what was your favorite? I mean, you can use some of that, but some of it can be taken a little bit to almost like intrusion on privacy. And to your point, when people are surprised in the interview, being interviewed, that the company actually took the effort and read something, an article they post or post on social media, would the interviewer be surprised if the CISO to be is actually went through all the lengths to find something about the person? Where do you draw the line? Like how far do you go? Is it a net positive or net negative? If you're like, oh my God, this person is really creepy because they did all this research that even though all of it is public, I mean, they may get like their own sense of it. What's your take?
That's a good question. I love that question. I think there's a limit to what you should dig into. You're not trying to do a full biopsy on the person's personal life, but you are trying to figure out if they're going to be a strong leader. Are they going to be able to give you the level of sponsorship, knock the obstacles down inside the company, provide the budgeting? That's really, so anything that's attuned to that. Their political affiliation probably has nothing to do with whether they can get through an obstacle for budgeting for you, right? Like, but you do want to see that the behavior of the company is more so. That's why I say, research the person, research the company. I would rather actually see the affiliations of the company and what they stand for, right? Do they have a viable DEIB program, right? That's one of the things I always look for, because everyone talks about it, but then you ask them, what kind of programs do you have? Like, oh, we're going to start one next year. Like, really? Okay. So those kind of things, and just to find out where they are. But I think there is, to your point, I think there's a limit. And I think also preparing for the hiring manager interview is very different than preparing for the HR interview, versus preparing for the board level interview. I could give some questions if you'd like, some examples of what we see in each. But I think, in general, to answer your question, I think there's a limit to I personally don't dig into that to know my clients. I do dig to see what their behavior has been and how, what the history has been. Because it's easy for me to get into a corner with them, like, ooh, they've had 3 CISOs in 7 years. That's, where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So let's figure that out. But I don't want to go in judgmental. Maybe there was 2 of those, someone left for competitive reasons. The other one wasn't, was a health thing. You just never know, right? So I don't want to.
It's a reason to be curious, right? I mean, it's a valid question. It's you're not judging, but you're like, what happened?
Yes, be judgmental, or be curious, not judgmental, right?
Yeah,
oops, I forgot I am a lefty, right? So,
it's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And so, kind of in the same vein, you mentioned that everyone has a specific way to prepare. I mean, you don't want to be the first. You don't want to tell your story for the first time when you're in the seat, right? So, and I know it's very specific, it's very personal to each candidate, but is there what are some of the themes, some of the best practices? Practice with your spouse or with a friend, like play the devil's advocate, ask me hard questions so that you can put the reps. What do you see people do? And it can be like different person to person, but what's some of the ways before the interview, how to make sure that your storytelling is on point?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, I don't have like the silver bullet answer in that one, other than like I can tell you what I do is I actually build a profile for everyone I'm about to talk to or have talked to, and then I build on that profile. Having a database helps, but if you're a CISO candidate, you probably don't have a client database sitting around. You could build one on a spreadsheet, but just look at 5 or 10 characteristics of who you're going to be speaking with, and just really prepare that way. Presenting, I don't know the whole, presenting in front of the mirror, presenting in front of all that works. Whatever works for you works. Right. So I typically will write down a bunch of notes and then look through them and make sure I understand it, then come up with my own questions for myself, things of that nature. But I think everyone has their own process, whatever you're doing. If it works for you, it's personal. Right. But I think that the nature of how I would prepare is based on the types of questions that I would ask. And that's how I would prepare for each interviewer, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So like, for instance, if you're formulating questions for the hiring manager, you really want to understand and get into their shoes for a bit, right? So like, what's the most difficult thing they've had to deal with over the last 1 or 2 years or 3 since they've been there, right? How has, a big question right now is how has AI, affected your business model? Basically questions that get them talking, right? Mm-hmm. You research where they came from. But I always like to ask, when we do our interviewing the interviewers process, we talked about it before. We have basically 3 questions, for these interviewers, why did you join? Why are you still there? Right? Can you pitch me on the company? Right? And how are you going to work with this role? How have you worked with and how are you going to work with, and what are some of the things. And through those kind of 4 or 5 questions, we can sort of get the interviewer talking and really telling their story. And so there's a good calibration there. Another one is like, what's the current level of security awareness that you feel the organization has? How would you rate yourselves, right? Is it a, 1 through 5? Is it a 3? Is it a 4? Is it a 1? And why, right? Someone coming in my position, where could we help the most? Where's the pain for you? And just keep on asking that through the interviewers. Where's the level of awareness? What do we need to do? Whereas if you're talking to HR, who may not know the nuances of your role, in the difference between ProdSec and AppSec and how they're building it, they might know the buzzwords, but not the details. It's like, where are you in that process? Where am I coming in on this process? Did you go date a bunch of people already, or am I the first date? Have you made an offer yet? Right? People will be like, why would I ask that? Well, you kind of want to know, like, what's the history here? Are they in the beginning of the process? Have they gone through this? Do they kind of know what they're looking for yet? Or am I acting as a little bit of the guinea pig here? I always recommend people getting their references ready before they start interviewing. It's one thing that people procrastinate on, and it becomes more painful and time consuming later. So, 2 people you reported to, 2 people that are business partners, 2 people that are reporting into you, maybe another personal reference that can speak to your character. Like, all of that gets it ready. Another big one right now is like, ensure that and we can get into more of this if we end up talking about compensation, but like, ensure that you know where they stand. If you're talking to an HR person, know where they stand on D&O policies, right? We do that. First conversation, like, what's the level of protection that you expect to see from this CISO and for this position? Mm-hmm. And half the time, statistically, they'll be like, oh, I'm not aware of that, right? Tell me a little bit more about that. And you're like, now you're educating them on why you need indemnification and things like that. But you want to know that, right? What is their target compensation? What are their benefits, right? What timeline are you looking for someone to start? The answer is always yesterday, right? What transition is acceptable as far as me doing that? And then if you switch over to a board member, right, that's a very different conversation altogether as well, because now you're looking at maybe 4 things to capture, in my opinion. How do you articulate strategy for the security? How does that align back to the business? How have you done that in the past and convince the board member this is how you've done it? How well do you know the threat landscape, both current and future, or outlook? That they want the chief look around the corner officer to come in. And then there's the risk assessment piece. How do you present risk to the organization? What's the protocol for doing that? Where have you done it before? And then there's this compliance and regulatory piece as well. And then board members usually want to see if you can wrap it into a common language, and have you driven that before in a company, right? Have you created a common language of risk, and how have you done it? So that's the most important thing, I think, when talking to a board member, is how are you going to talk to us as a CISO, and what should we expect as far as this kind of common language, so we can all have a conversation about it and not talk about different nomenclature and terms. So anyway, those are just some things that each interview kind of grouping, and obviously gets a lot more detail if you're talking to the head of product versus the engineering versus counsel, that kind of thing. So
certainly. And interviews, are they mostly in person or over Zoom these days?
These days they're still over Zoom. I mean, at least initially. And then the later rounds, people are coming in, getting flown in, driving in to meet with people in person. So it's somewhat like we're going to use the first round or 2. It depends. We had one a couple of weeks ago where they wanted to fly the people out immediately, and that was cool. It showed a level of commitment. Going to pay for their travel in and out, that kind of thing. But most of it is, I'd still say, Zoom. So and Zoom, by the way, Zoom interviews are tough. Like, let's not figure out, yeah, we've all been doing it for 3 years. Great. We've all become like Zoom experts, but Zoom interviews are a little bit odd, right? There's a little bit of latency. You don't get to see the person's full body. They're actually, everyone's kind of staring at, I tend to move around a lot and move my hands, but, which is probably annoying to many people, but, that's kind of how I am in real life, outside of this little box. And I think a lot of people probably go through that too.
This episode is brought to you by Afinia, a community where 2,000 CISOs and other senior executives network, learn, and succeed together. To apply for your complimentary membership, please visit www.afinia.com or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
So we covered kind of the prep, which I would imagine a lot of it, whether it's Zoom or in face-to-face in real life, the prep you still want to do your due diligence and you want to get your story straight. But what do you? Are there any specific gotchas or specific advice you give to people what to do the day of the interview, whether it's Zoom or the real life? As they're kind of signing into Zoom or opening the door into the office, like what do you recommend? How should they carry themselves as they get into this? What are some mistakes or some of the best tactics for people just to be aware of?
Yeah, I'd love to cover that. I also can cover some what to listen to in these interviews as things that are potential flags as well. So we should get into that too. That's actually really a lot of people ask me about that. But yeah, as far as how do you carry yourself, so I mean, I guess the first thing is kind of know what your game plan is going to be, and then actually ask for a game plan in the beginning of the interview is something I always recommend. So when I say game plan is like time management game plan. So like, don't forget to ask them to say, I actually have a lot of questions. It does a catch-22, right? Because so I actually have a lot of questions, doing my research and I'm really interested. You want to say that because it's like, I'm interested, right? I did my research. But you want to be careful, and that they're like, "Oh, hey, Misha, that's great. Why don't you start with your questions?" We're like, "Actually, I actually want to hear your piece too, because you're going to probably answer a lot of my questions. So just be ready to say." But you definitely want to set the game plan that because I think a lot of people I debrief on someone happened yesterday. They're like, "Yeah, I had like 3 minutes to ask questions." I'm like, "Why? You need to be umpiring this thing, right? Like you need to." There should be no reason that the hiring manager just went off for like 48 minutes and you had 2 minutes left. So ask for a game plan, politely, tactfully, and maybe a little bit less time on the, socialization part and the pleasantries, and a little bit more on like, let's just focus on this. And look, I know it's difficult for everyone's overscheduled these days, but try to get 10 or 20 minutes on both ends. One, to reflect and just get your thoughts together, anticipate, kind of visualize how it's going to go. It never usually goes that way, but at least you're getting yourself into that mindset. And then at the back end, you definitely want to have 10 minutes we can talk about later to like reflect, right? But I have that problem. I'm like back to back all day long. And then at the end of the day, I'm like, what did Misha said this one thing that was really important, and I'm darn it, I can't remember. And I get mad at myself because I'm too overscheduled, right? So don't do that. Don't be me. A couple of so anyway, let me see if I answered your question there. If you have any follow up on that.
And so this is kind of for Zoom, but for like in real life, face to face. I've been out of this game, applying for jobs and interviewing for a while, but I know that sometimes people get in trouble when there's a receptionist and they treat the receptionist like differently than they treat an executive, and kind of it's whether small or large organization or office. So I know, and again, anecdotal, but I'm sure there are red flags that you may come across, whether it's Zoom or in real life. What are some of the things that people just need to be aware of in that?
Yeah, I have had my own shares with my personal experiences, like especially during the summer, like get there nice and early. No, like not like 2 hours early, but maybe like 15 minutes early so you can cool down between the walk from the parking lot. You walk in, you're all sweaty. They're like, "Okay, they're ready for you, Misha. Let's go upstairs." And you're like this, and use the restroom.
You're nervous, and you were just like in 100 degrees.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is not natural to anyone, right? So being cool and calm and collective and breathe, right? Just that's a silly thing to tell people, but just like make sure you take a couple deep breaths. I don't really have any specific examples other than just, making sure you're there early, like 10 minutes, 5 minutes to the meeting is already late for me. I was, kind of grew up that way. My family, if you're 5 minutes there, you're already 5 minutes late, right? So get there nice and early, get prepared. get your mind around it, and not a lot of chit chatting in the lobby, but just pleasantries are nice. So I think I'm more concerned about when you interview, what to look out for, if you want to cover that.
Let's go there.
Yeah, because I hear these all the time, and I have to be really careful with CISOs and other executives, like the way that they debrief. And it's like, ooh, yeah, I can see that one being tough. So the first one I would give advice on is like, watch how sharp your elbows are. Meaning, like, if you're throwing around strong opinions about how something should be built, or even like something about a technology, that's going to be like a flag for them when they're evaluating you. I just had this happen with someone, and it was a completely innocent comment, but it led the client to think of the predecessor that moved on because of kind of a sharp elbow sort of situation, and then that candidate's now kind of teetering. So that's a real thing, right? Like it's hard to be completely neutral on everything. You do need to have an opinion. Just be careful how strong those opinions are. Another one would be just gaslighting, right? Like this happens all the time with technical folks. Like no one wants to be scared about the things that you probably know that they may not, right? Like no one wants to be talked to that way. And also, you're not the only one that's probably been through this. So again, you're making an assumption that they may not have the level of knowledge that you do.
Can you give a specific example of this?
Yeah, we had one not too long ago where a candidate went in and started talking about a kind of a scare tactic of what was going on with a current breach, and they were in the same industry, and they sort of were like, well, you need to do this, and this. And they didn't really bother to ask what they had already done. And so it was this diatribe discussion around the things that they needed to do to protect themselves, almost like a consultant would do, but they were interviewing, right? And so while the client appreciated the knowledge and the depth, it sort of backfired on them. And they kind of came in and they felt like he was too preachy, right? Was the comment. And yeah. So that's the gaslighting piece. And on that note, like brevity is your friend. So this is a problem I have, right? Like I talk. It takes one to know one, I guess. But like be succinct, right? Be thorough, but be succinct, right? And a lot of people will just ramble, right? And it's nervousness. It's I got all this knowledge to share. I want you to be impressed by me. There's all these things going through. There's a whole psychological output that we can look at there. Another one's we've had it recently was there's a lot of security sponsored, or there's a lot of security programs that are kind of in shambles in the sense that they're not being sponsored level, and these candidates are leaving those environments and going and interviewing. We've had a couple situations where the candidates walked in and sort of talked poorly about their most recent experience, not like this was terrible and this, but like enough to where it was obvious that they were running away from something and not running towards something. And it sort of left a little bit of a question in the client's mind. Like everyone's going through something, right? I think that's the rule there. Just like be curious, not judgmental. Like everyone's going through something. The client's going through something. Each hiring manager is going through something. So they get it. But like coming in and sort of finding the shoulder to cry on in your first date is never good, right?
Actually, I think it's very interesting. And I think it goes back to your comment about telling stories, because I think no matter what you say, the person on the other end, the question in their head will be why did you leave? Why are you looking? It's this kind of attribution, whether implicit or explicit. That's the question they're asking. So having a story, having a valid explanation why you did what you did, why you're looking for what you're looking for. Just thinking, being introspective enough, I think is hugely important. It sounds like, based on what you're saying, being aware of the interviewer, figuring out your why you're passionate about what you're passionate about, why you do what you do, like why you're here in this chair, right? So it's being aware that there's this internal dialogue going on the company side. I think it probably could be important as well.
Yeah, funny thing is, you just uncovered the reason why I suggest people always do storytelling in my, like, when I'm prepping someone. It's because I want, if you're a CISO or a CIO or someone that's fairly technical, like, I'm trying to keep you on the rails. So, like, if you tell a story and you have to stick to that story, and yeah, sure, there's pieces you add every time you make it different, but if you don't have a story, you don't have a plan going in, you start telling a story that's very, like, dysfunctional and it's like all over the place. So, like, that's why I said practice your storytelling, because when you're nervous or when you're not exactly sure how to talk about it, you start talking all over the place. So, like, that's why I tell people to work on your storytelling, so that that's the muscle memory you walk into. I don't know if that makes sense, but you kind of hit nail on the head there as to why we do that. It's, yeah, I mean, a nice story is a nice story, but it's really to keep these highly technical, brilliant people on the rails and not off the rails. So, if that makes sense.
Interesting, for sure.
Yeah.
Something that I forgot to ask when we were covering this with the references. Obviously, it's important to have references, people you reported to, people who reported to you, maybe personal reference. But sometimes companies not dismiss them as credible, because you wouldn't provide someone as a reference unless you probably know that they'll say something nice about you. And
Sure.
I know that some of the companies, they're trying to go around and solicit references from someone you didn't list as your source. How frequent does it happen? And is it something just to be?
Yeah, if you're a CISO today, and you're applying for a job and you get further into the process, just assume there's going to be back channel references, off list references, every time. Yeah, it's not even a question anymore. I mean, every one of our searches, we do off listed references before the client even recommends, because we know that they're going to come later in and be like, yeah, we actually, can you find 3 people that will talk about Misha's character and how he operated? I think it's something that's been around for at least 6 or 7 years in this particular space. And it's very much a common. So don't be surprised if it happens. I've had a couple of people take it personally. That's just the process. And people do that to us all the time too. They're calling, they'll look on our website, they'll find a logo that they know, and they'll just call that person and be like, hey, what do you know about Hitch? Like, we didn't, luckily we were going to put them on the website. We probably had a good experience with them, but, there's not that I can think of that aren't on the website. But the point is that, like, everyone back channels everyone. I think that's, with so much information being thrown at you, it's sort of common knowledge today.
Well, I think it kind of makes sense. We kind of touched on dating, getting married. And if you go on a blind date, you kind of want to make sure it's not a serial killer of some sort.
This is true. That's a high bar, right? Or a low bar, I should say, starting from serial killer to just someone that's going to talk about themselves the whole time. But by the way, some other things, like, on that note, like, don't complain or try to deflect a question about your resume. Going back to that, a lot of people were like, "Oh, I didn't know that question was going to come." Everything's fair game. If they can see it, it's fair game, right? And sometimes people aren't prepared for that, and they kind of give the "woe is me" answer. Like, "Oh, I was put into this situation, I was put into that situation," and so, like, that's why it's on the resume, sort of thing. But just, again, have a story for it. One thing I will say, this is a personal thing, but, like, as a worst practice for CISOs, is not asking about compensation or in-office requirements or any kind of other nullifier in the first meeting. If you're not asking about compensation or what their range or targeted range, or how many times you have to be in the office, regardless of what you've seen the job posting, our job descriptions, our personal or our private profiles that we have, even if we put it in there, make sure you're asking, right? Because it's important for you to hear it, the way that the client describes it. Mm-hmm. And it's important to ask that, because they need to know that, and, understand that this may turn into a reflection of, or, a rebound, right? Like, "Oh, well, Misha, what are you looking at as far as compensation?" And then we can get into that later. But, or what what's acceptable to you as in office? But you want to know that. You don't want to. Way too many CISOs get all the way through this process, and those specific two questions, are not answered, and they're super disappointed when they find out that the answer was not what they're looking for, and it's completely avoidable. So that's why I say that's a bad practice not to ask those questions, in my opinion.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And is it just kind of is the reason for that companies want to hire a CISO, but what they need is a director level executive, or kind of mismatch in terms of expectations and the reality on the company side? Like or the company doesn't really understand where the market is for a certain level position? Like what's usually?
I would say that only 30% of the companies that we work with actually look at someone's survey like ours or Heidrick or someone like that, like actually took the time to say it's something besides Radford. That's the data point that, no, I always call Radford Wrongford. I don't mean, not personally. You guys are great over at Radford, but your data in this particular area is way off, like way, way off. And it's not getting any better. It's actually going in the opposite direction. So, but that's the data point they look at. So if that's their data point, and you're finding out about it in the fourth interview, that's a problem, right? So you're wasting your own time. You're putting hope before reality, and so you really kind of want to know it. I think it's important to know it, to understand how they're even thinking about the position, and also probably not to react too much to it too. Like if they're pretty far away, maybe they need some additional education on where the market is. Maybe they just haven't had it yet. Mm-hmm. And so that's just that's the reason. You just really want to be prepared. You want to go in with anticipatory, design, right? Mm-hmm. Anticipate everything that could go wrong in this situation, as opposed to just hoping that it doesn't go wrong.
For sure.
This episode is brought to you by Afinia, a community where 2,000 CISOs and other senior executives network, learn, and succeed together. To apply for your complimentary membership, please visit www.afinia.com or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
Well, now that you've gone through the interview, you hung up on your Zoom call, or you close the office door, and you're walking to your car. What's some of the things I should do once the interview is done?
Yeah, turn on the air conditioning in your car first. Get nice and cool. Yeah, get some water. Look, follow-ups are always nice. A nice email follow-up, again, succinct, right? We want to be careful not to, I have had situations where it's been like a diatribe of 6, 7, 8 paragraphs. And again, that's a reflection on whether you, have a lot to say and this and that. I mean, sometimes people ask if you could solve a specific problem or follow up with that. And obviously more content is needed, but for the most part, a nice, thoughtful, I thought this was interesting. I thought this was interesting. I love the mission. Reiterate why you're there. Nice email. Again, don't schedule meetings right after, because you really need that time to reflect. A lot of people are like, do I need to assess or I need to reflect? I think it's reflection, right? I think you take 10 minutes and just write down or type as quickly as you can. Send yourself a text. That's kind of what I do. Like what were the top of mind things that we covered? What was, how did I reflect on the actual personal connection? What were some of the questions and answers that they asked, that I gave, that they gave me? What was the depth of the match personality wise? What are some of the goals that you would like to achieve now that you just heard what you heard? And like a lot of people just jump to the end and they're just like, oh, I think that one went really well. And, that's when I come in, because if you work with a search firm, especially someone like us, who's like kind of your concierge through this whole thing. I want to understand what you're excited about. I don't want my 13-year-old's answer when she comes home from school, which is how was school? It is fine, right? So because I asked the wrong question, right? So, but like, what are some of the major or minor concerns? What were some of the answers that you gave? How would you, what was your reflection on yourself? Again, our job when we are doing this is to understand who the client really is and who the candidate really is and how they're reacting to these situations. That's how we can assess the match. The least amount of detail we get means it makes the guessing game that much harder, right? If we have 20 points of data, and I know Misha was concerned about this, and this, and that they address that in the next meeting, then it's probably going to be a much better match. So those are a couple things. I guess one thing I don't recommend doing, which may sound a little bit weird, is I don't recommend going immediately on LinkedIn and connecting to that person. There's no reason for it, right? If you had a great meeting, connect to them over time. There's like no rush to do it. People like immediately get in their car and just like connect to the person. Like it's like this instant gratification thing that we have. You just give it a little bit of time, and then think about it. Write a nice note like a day or two later if you want, or wait a week. You know, there's no like law that says you have to connect with someone on LinkedIn right after you meet with them. And it's kind of socially awkward when you do it. And I think the next thing is just like don't pontificate or don't really get too wrapped up in that very interview. Like keep dating, right? Keep thinking about the next date that you have to go on. Reflect, do the exercise, and then just don't harp on it, right? Like it's only going to make you. I talked to a candidate the other day, and she was really, really hard on herself about these questions on the interview that she had. And oh my gosh, these incumbents are going to be much better than me and this and that. I'm like, walk me through the questions. And we walked, I'm like, that was a stellar answer. Like, why are you beating yourself up? Like you did great. And by the way, because there's multiple incumbents in the environment and they're talking to someone inside, that means there's probably something going on with one or both of those incumbents. So you're probably in pole positions. Like, don't think about it like you're going to be at a disadvantage. Think about it as you're an advantage. Stay positive, right? And think about the next thing, right? So, yeah. Anyway, that was a lot more information.
No, it was great. It's great. So now we went through this, and we have an offer in hand. What's your advice on how to negotiate? Like, what happens after you get an offer? And these days, they're exploding dates. You have to decide really quickly what some of the best practices and some of the red flags and the gotchas people need to be aware of.
Yeah. I mean, let's even backing up for a second. First of all, like negotiating offers is not black and white. It's not what CISOs do, right? You're all not good at negotiating offers because you're not supposed to be, right? You're good at negotiating with vendors. I'll give you that. But, and you are professional risk mitigators, right? So putting in perspective, you know, the company has a little bit of an advantage right now in this economy, where, you know, the CISO comes in and they're trying to, you know, come to a certain requirement, or this is their budget, or, you know, hopefully you know that before you get to the final stage. I think what most companies don't realize is how nuanced the CISO search could be. I actually was on another event yesterday, and the moderator had a great analogy, and he said, you know, like when you look at your value, your true value, you look at it like Kelley Blue Book, right? And, you know, before you buy a car, you look at Kelley Blue Book, which is true, except in the world of the CISO, instead of buying a car, you're buying like a transformer, is what I told him. Because you're buying at the same time, you're buying a boat, a car, a hang glider, a motorcycle, a minivan, you know, like a camper, a semi. Like, and by the way, CISOs have to be all these different things at one time, right? So that's why companies are a little bit surprised and often shocked about how in-depth CISOs get on their offers. Very much different than hiring an engineer or hiring a product person. And I tell this to clients all the time, and they're like, yeah, no, we're good. We got it. And I'm like, all right, just wait. Just wait. Like, it's going to be a lot harder than you think, right? And this is probably the most value that we provide is walking them through the gotchas and really being that translator. But besides the rule of getting in, you've got an offer. I think, so I'm assuming by this time, Misha, you've already shared your target, right? Is that the assumption?
Mm-hmm. Well, the assumption is went through the rounds. I met everyone. We're on the same page in terms of the range. Everything looks good. I have an offer. What happens then on how to, well, one, kind of maximize my position, but also not leave a bad taste in the hiring organizations, not create some sort of bad blood and shoot myself in the foot. Yes, I squeezed everything I could, but then I've headwinds as when I started in the position and people hate me for being so greedy. Or like, how do you navigate that?
First of all, don't ever worry about that. That would be my first rule. Like, this is time to negotiate. This is the only time to negotiate is when you have an offer. It's going to be a lot harder to do this 2 years from now when you realize you're being overworked and underpaid, right? Like, do it now. do it tactfully. But here's my target. You try to be transparent. If you want to break down your, again, target, not what I'm making today, right? Target, that's really important. I'm targeting this based on my family needs and my perceived market value, where the position is, where your industry is. Like, you've done the research, right? You've seen all the surveys, you know what you're also making, you know what you want to make, so et cetera. And so I think, by the way, there's no perfect comp packages, right? It's always it's always a tug of war. And if you're in a private company, for instance, that has equity, understand that at least half of your targeted compensation is going to be equity based. You're expecting, as a leader coming in as a VP, SVP, EVP, is that you are going to be helping to build out the value of this company. And so they're going to give you a large part of your compensation towards that. That's a thing, right? So, and so I think, on the private side of companies, or even public companies, I always joke around as like, show me the money, right? I'm like, show me the math, right? So I want to see a spreadsheet that I can plug in my numbers and show you the delta of what I'm expected to make in the next 6 months to a year, and what I'd be leaving on the table, and literally like delta by year. Like, you're saying I'm going to make this in year one. Year one's important because that's usually when you have potentially a signing bonus. But you're also on an amortized annual bonus, so they kind of equal each other out sometimes. And then year two, you don't have that signing bonus. And so like now, okay, what's the performance of your bonus? What are some other people at my level? What are they seeing, right? Really get into the details, get into the math. On the equity side, you really have to understand the value of their equity. What's their valuation? How many shares are outstanding? What's their revenue projections? Like, you should be under NDA by the time that you are having this conversation. If not, make sure you are, so that there's no excuse for anyone not to share this information. By the way, companies will not nefariously try to do that, but they'll purposely be vague, right? I've been fairly disappointed by our private company negotiations lately, because they just aren't as transparent with us. And so we know we're going to get the tough questions from the CISOs. So we kind of are a pain in the butt to them, like, this is what it looks like. This is how it should look like. If you can't explain how the math works to me, how are you going to explain it to the candidate? Like, we're here as your advocate. We're not just going to go push, a blind offer just because you tell me it's a great offer, right? I know what a great offer looks like. I've done this 200 times. So wrong person to tell that to. Yes.
Sure. Well, it's also different. If it's a public company, it's one conversation. So you can look it up. If it's a private company, I mean, how do they value? Is there a secondary market? Or yes or no? If there's no secondary market, then the value of the shares is how much the company will pay for it when you leave, or like it becomes really, that math becomes really fuzzy really quickly. So it's
hard. Look, and that's where I always tell people, like, please call me. Even if we help probably one CISO candidate a week, it has nothing to do with our jobs, right? Because we want to make sure that they're getting a market offer. They're like, hey, I have this offer coming in. I have one today, actually. I have a friend that I'm helping. And it's like, yeah, this is what the numbers look like. I just want to make sure, it doesn't mean you have to take our advice. I just want you to know where fair market is and so let's back into the numbers. And I'd say at least 75% of the time when I say, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this to calculate that? They're like, no, they haven't offered that to me. Right. And like the biggest one for me is if they're not sharing revenue projections, that's a massive red flag for a private company. Like, let's just assume I've signed an NDA, right? Never mind the share price or the number of shares. If they can't tell me where the revenue projections are going, I'm under an NDA. I'm not going to go out to the market and be like, they told me they were going to do 200,000, right? And they're only doing 100. I need to understand that trajectory, because I need to understand the multiple, which needs to basically determine the value of the equity, right?
Well, you also don't want to jump on board of a sinking ship,
Yeah, well, you just want to jump on board with a transparent ship, right? Like it's okay, right? There's been plenty of situations where equity these days is in the toilet for a lot of these companies. That doesn't mean that it's a bad company with a bad mission and they're going under, right? They actually ask them what their plan is, ask them how they're going to get there. But they need to show the math. They need to show that they need to have a storytelling moment as well, right? I think the other thing is when you're negotiating, also try to be transparent with them about your timing, about other opportunities. Again, you're not gaslighting them and saying, I have 5 opportunities, you need to come to the table now. but just be honest with, what you're looking for. What's your timeline? You mentioned exploding offers, right? You definitely want to try to set it up so you can have as many apples to apples comparisons. You don't do this very often. So,
right. But is it realistic to have multiple offers? I know we're coming up on time, but we'll probably continue. But is it realistic to have multiple offers to compare, to kind of contrast and play off each other?
Most of our searches over the last year or two have had multiple offer situations. Yeah, most of them.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so the timing doesn't always match up perfectly, but it does equal out in the end. I mean, you get to see, you really want to have another offer to compare to, even if you're in the beginning of the negotiation. By the way, the same thing applies to protection too, right? Like, so make sure you're talking about that early, right? Don't make it a negotiation. It's not a negotiating point, right? Being on the DNO, in my opinion, being on a DNO policy for a public or even private company right now, it's a given. Don't let that slip by. Don't be like, oh, we'll get there eventually. Or no executive is on the DNO policy. Really? Is no executive must be at the level of risk that I'm at walking into this job where you guys don't have built anything and now you're being SEC file. like it's not even an option, right? In my opinion. And that's like 100% of our placements are on DNO.
Chief scapegoat officer, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think, the other things are like, do you need to consult back with your company during this transition? Maybe they're in the middle of a major launch, right? You want to go out professionally, talk to them about what that looks like. Talk to them about how you're going to resign, when you're going to resign. Like, don't make it a secret, right? Just you want to try to avoid conflicts. There was a big one about talking about what advisory positions you're in, right? If you're on advisory councils, if you're on advisory boards, make sure that that's all out there, right? Don't want any surprises. If there's anything on your record, right? People in our industry hack. They may have had felony charges or misdemeanors for the right reasons, right? Like maybe that was their job, right? And so just let everyone know there should be no surprises in these situations.
Well, speaking of advisory roles, I think it's a lot of members in our community are interested in either they are in advisory roles or they're interested in getting on advisory boards and things like this. So it's probably it would be an interesting topic for the next conversation.
Absolutely. Love to do that. I'd say over 50% of the CISOs we work with are on some sort of advisory council or advisory board or board member. So,
great.
Big topic.
It sounds like we covered so much ground, but I think one thing we didn't cover is probably a good topic for the next conversation. On like day one, what some of the best practices and how to hit the ground running and early wins, low hanging fruit, like some of the things, how to set you up for success in a new organization. I know how much of this you want to cover, but it's certainly a topic that I think a lot of people will be interested in.
Well, I'd say real briefly, one thing we didn't cover is like what happens after you've accepted the offer and like before you start. That's a small window of time that I'd love to see CISOs spending a little bit more time thinking through. I'd like to see companies spending a little bit more time thinking. Like we have a best practice there, which first of all, take time off, right? Like you clear your head, decompress, go for long hikes, whatever you need to, get some air. But it's kind of a critical time for you because you need to open the door for these relationships that are eventually going to become your family, right? You're all going to be living in the same housing complex. So understand who these execs, continue that research, right? Learn as much as possible about the business. Ask to be part of the business. You may be still working for the other company, but if there's an important board meeting or vendor assessment or regulatory, be asked to be a fly on the wall for that. So you can, be involved, like watch them on social media, watch them on LinkedIn, stay connected to that business, watch, major events. And then as you get really close, you want to start asking the interviewers that you met with to meet one-on-one, buy them coffee. Thanks for your time. What's going on in your world? Like, what are you worried about? Where can I come in and try to make it? This is before you start. Right. I think it's just a good best practice. And then for the company too, they need to figure out how to do a better job engaging. Been a lot of situations where people have got wooed into counteroffers because they just weren't engaged on a long-term start process. So we can talk more about it next time, but this is not the time to be saying, okay, the offer's done, Misha's good, we'll just, I'm sure he'll show up in August 30th.
Yeah, you show up day one. There's no desk. There's no workstation.
That too.
There's no login. There is nothing. You're welcome on board. The gift box is going to arrive in 1 week's time. You just
right. Yeah. We certainly dropped off that quite a bit. I'd like to see that get better. I mean, on both sides, right? Both sides. So
for sure. Awesome. Well, Michael, this, as always, tremendous
fun
insight.
Fun.
All of it actionable. Love those sessions. I think a lot of our members, given by the views we get and the feedback that we get, they're great. Can't wait for the next one. Looking forward to catching up with Black Hat.
Yes, that's right. We'll see each other at Black Hat. We can do one of these live. People can just come and, yell at us while we're doing it and all that fun stuff. So
sounds good. Looking forward. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Misha. Take care.
If you liked this episode, please subscribe to this channel and visit Afinia.com for more information about your complimentary membership, or click the link in the show notes.